what I typically would have done with the client at this point is I would have met with them. I would have gotten an idea of what they were trying to do. I would have worked out, you know, the script and the storyboard. So what we're doing is we're picking it up like basically right after I have an existing script and I'm starting to work my way into the storyboard. Okay.
Okay.
So one of the things that I establish at the front end is, what does the style look like? Now, if I've done this right, do you see something that's labeled illustration styles, and it looks like a, you know, just like a square graphic with a bunch of images in it?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I put this in front of my client and I said, what exactly, what style do you want this stuff to be drawn in? Do you want it high detail, low detail? Do you want it full color or black and white? And they pretty much settled right in the middle where I've got these blue silhouettes. So what that means is that I'm going to draw in sort of a cartoon style, a little bit better than the Bicablo people, which are these two guys below that, and not quite as good as something that I might do if I was tracing a photograph. So that means I'm going to be drawing these images from scratch, okay? And that I'm going to use a single spot color in order to get there. And so now that I've got the style straightened out, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my image list, which the client has sent me. And the first thing that's on there is they want a soldier that's in training or marching. So I'm going to, at this point, I have what I need in order to start drawing. So let me go ahead and pull that up.
So they sent you the image that they want, or they sent you the, they just tell you?
They just tell me. So at this point, I have a piece of text that's three words that says, and I know that scene one is going to be a soldier that's training or marching, okay?
Okay.
And so at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Photoshop, and I'm going to get my pens ready. We're going to go like this. And then I'm just setting up my Cintiq right now to be able to draw. And right now, the layer that I'm on is called blue. And so I'm going to use this to do just sort of a quick, loose sketch of a soldier marching. Now, if you remember the image that I just showed you, this doesn't have to be very pretty. This is just kind of a light cartoon. I'm going to go back a bit. And so if I think about a soldier marching, so he's got kind of like the little lid of his helmet, you know, and he's got, you know, his arm over his shoulder like this, okay? And he's got his arm up because he's moving, okay? You know, maybe he's got a rifle over his shoulder. It's the easiest way to draw a soldier, plus the helmet, for me anyway. And then, you know, he's got a foot out because he's marching. Okay. And, you know, they have those kind of, those boots that sort of, or the pants that are sort of tucked in.
Yep.
So I'm going to show that, you know, with some paratrooper boots. And then just kind of where I think the leg would go, sort of in here. And it doesn't have to be super great because it was at that kind of mid-range level of quality. In fact, this is probably too good for what the client was after, but that's okay. We'll kind of keep it at this. So I'm zooming in to do a little bit of detail on the face. Okay. And right now, all I'm doing are getting just the major strokes. Now I've just decided I don't really like the way that his hand is. You know, I don't know why I don't like it. I just don't like it. So I'm going to erase that and try something else. Maybe it's not quite so up like that, but he is walking. So I want to get that motion in there.
Yep.
Okay. That's a little bit better, right? And maybe because he's marching, just to get the idea of marching, you know, I give him a bit of a background, and maybe there's trees or something like that kind of behind him. Okay. I can do a couple of little additional details. So, you know, looking at a uniform, sometimes they have knee pads. They're like in special forces or something. You know, I mean, you tell me, what would be the kinds of things that you'd see on a military uniform?
Cargo pants. They'd have a utility belt.
Definitely.
With
so
like
big old belt.
Yeah, canteen-like items on there. They'd have a cuff on their sleeve, likely at like right above the wrist.
Mm-hmm.
They would have likely some sort of backpack which you could put there.
Oh, good one.
The bent shoulder to give you some more, and as well as the straps.
Yep, that's a great one. So we'll do like that. And I'm gonna tighten up his helmet just a little bit. Well, I'm not very good at drawing helmets. It's something I got to practice later. So that's, given the level of what they were at, this is actually pretty good. Okay, it's good enough for me to, you know, to go forward with it. So I'm going to switch to a new layer, and I'm going to change my color to black. And so now this is the real drawing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and with more detail. So I've got a smaller brush really. So I'm going to draw it at around 5 points, which just makes sense for the resolution that I'm drawing at. Which, by the way, I tend to draw on square canvases. I have no idea why I do that. I just like it. I don't know. I probably should draw something that would be, if I was really thinking about it, that it'd be a little bit more fitting to the dimensions of a video. It's an old habit, I guess, that I should probably break out of. Okay, so he's got his little collar on like this.
So the blue layer was so you could sketch how you want to do your detailed drawing.
Yeah, the blue layer. Yeah, it's like think of it as sort of like a rough pencil sketch.
Okay.
And weirdly, this is another thing where it's like old habits, but they a lot of illustrators will use blue non-photographic pencils. You see this with comic book artists a lot, that they'll use a blue non-photographic pencil to do their initial drawing in, just like I did in digitally. Now that could have been any color in the world, right? But you know, traditionally the color of an initial pencil sketch is blue. Okay, now there's a thing that you can do in Photoshop where you can draw straight lines. So one of the things I'm going to do is up here at the top, this is the pressure sensitivity of the Cintiq, okay, of the Wacom tablet that I'm using. So I'm going to turn the pressure sensitivity off. I'm going to draw a dot where I want the barrel of the gun to go. I'm going to move my stylus down to where I want the back of the barrel. I'm going to hold the shift key and tap it again, and I've got a straight line. So you can, using the shift key like that, you can use, you can draw straight lines. I'm going to turn the pressure sensitivity back on to do anything else. And that, what that does, the pressure sensitivity, it gives the drawing a little bit more life by thickening and narrowing the stroke as you go. So for example, here's a, right, I can do this all without doing anything other than by how hard I press, right? Like that.
Okay.
That's having pressure sensitivity on. If it's off, then it's all the same uniform thickness, no matter how hard I press. Okay. So I'm going to zoom back in and I'll work out the details of his belt.
Some of this,
Maybe got a little pocket. Mm-hmm.
Some of this I'm able to do on the iPad and some of the apps that I have there with the stylus. I was actually kind of impressed how some of the apps are intuitive, but they don't have this many options with different layers and other things like what you have here. So it's, I have a Wacom tablet.
Yeah, so I'm actually, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm actually drawing in Photoshop, which I don't know, there's not a whole lot of people that, I don't know, I guess there's a few that do, but I haven't run into many graphic facilitators that actually draw in Photoshop. Since you have an iPad, I've found that just from what I've seen out there in the market, I think there's a lot of visual practitioners that use Work Visual. That's one. I don't know if you've seen that one yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, that'd be one to check out, because after you're done, from what I hear, what you after you're done drawing in Work Visual, there's actually a replay button, and so you can actually have that kind of whiteboard animation type effect without this whole process that I'm going through right now, that I'm about to show you. Because this is what I'm doing is going to be like a 3-step process, right?
Okay. You could put some cargo
Work Visual.
You could put some cargo pockets on the pants if you wanted additional detail, if you care about it.
That's a good idea.
They
Okay.
have them at the tops and bottoms now, which is kind of strange. That little itty bitty cargo pocket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll just kind of do the
Yeah.
idea of a pocket.
So your pressure sensitivity is off for you to get that line that you just did, right?
No, that was just a quick stroke. It's
Okay.
only for doing very straight lines like the barrel of this rifle, right?
Okay.
That was just a quick throw line. All right, so I'm going to zoom out and take a look at this guy. So I kind of like where he's at. He looks pretty good.
Yep.
Now, you know, I could turn off the pressure sensitivity for the horizon line here, but I'm not, because, you know, the horizon, it's an organic thing, and it's, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. Now I'm actually not going to draw the trees in black, because remember, this was going back to that initial style guide that I had before. This is supposed to be in color. Okay. So I'm going to switch layers. Now I've gone down to the layer that's between the white and the blue. And actually at this point I can get rid of the blue and just see if there's anything else that I want to fix. He doesn't look like he's got much of a neck. So I'm going to zoom way in and kind of bring his chin around. Now that I look at it, maybe I'll give him a little bit of hair like that, but that's pretty good. This is already above the level of detail that the client asked for, but you know, that's close enough. So I'm going to pick what I think is a pretty good khaki color. Khaki. I was in Boston.
Yeah.
And for camo, I'm just going to do a series of double lines. There's lots of ways to draw camo, but I like this. And I've intentionally picked a mid-tone, which is to say a color that sits right between white and black, so that it shows up well either on its own against white, but it's not so dark that it competes with the black to define the form of the shape that's there. So that's why I picked this particular green or khaki. And I'm just going to do this series of lines. Mm-hmm.
If I'm quiet, I'm just writing frantically to capture your rationale for why you do those things. So
no worries. And I'll you know, share this video with you when I'm done too. Okay. So I'll do the same thing on his helmet.
it's interesting. You and I have talked about pace before, and what I like is you're making choices that allow you to go a lot faster. The camouflage that I've drawn in the past, I'll do entire patterns like this, but it takes me much longer after the fact or during the session. And this is just right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of, you're right. That is absolutely part of the pacing. Now, one thing I'm doing right here that I'm just getting into is exploring the use of using pattern and the shape of pattern in order to convey the shape of the object that it's on top of. So you see how I kind of contoured these lines just a little. It's just got a slight curve, as if it was wrapping around the cylinder of the guy's leg. And again, that's something that I'm just starting to play with. I'm not an expert on that one yet, but I think you know, I'm going to be working a little bit more with that, just to experiment and see what I can do.
If you ever are looking for suggestions on how to do that, if you're, you know, in your spare time doodling or traveling, I'm happy to share different ways that I learned how to do that a long time ago with stippling and cross hatching on like various shapes.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
I'll make a note of that.
Yeah, I'd really appreciate that. That would be really cool. One thing that so I played around with a little bit of stippling and cross hatching, but what I haven't really done, I don't know if there's a word for it, but sometimes if you look at like an engraving, like something that you'd find on a dollar bill, the way that they use line to do not just shading, but also to do form, I think is really cool. And it's something that I don't even know what you call that. I'm just starting to get into it. Do you?
Could you repeat it one more time? I was jotting down something you said.
Well, it's almost like a contour line, right? Like how do you use, you know, a series of horizontal lines that curve in such a way that it reveals the shape of the thing?
Oh, I see. Yeah, that would be tricky. I'll tell you something I've done for the last few years working with the military is I draw a lot of shapes with American flags on them, like
Hmm.
hands, that sort of thing. And that's, seeing the lines and the stars go throughout has helped a little bit with that, but not specifically what you were just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's just something I'm starting to play with. Now, here's what I could do, right? I could, at this point, I could turn on a real fancy brush. I might give it a try just to see what happens. I could turn on a real fancy, let's see if there's a good one, brush in Photoshop. And I think but here's the thing. I don't know exactly the right brush to use for these trees, right?
Okay.
And because I don't want to take forever to do this because it's, not something that the client asked for. What I'm going to do is just do a couple of tweaks to the brush that I am using, just to make it a little bit more interesting texturally. And I'll do just like the idea of trees. Okay. Like this.
Seems like pine trees are like a staple on a military base too. So.
And I was sort of thinking like Camp Lejeune type thing.
Yeah.
What do you see all over the place? Okay. And now I've got my picture. So I'm going to get rid of the blue. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And I think that's pretty good. Actually, it's a little bit weird to have, I think now it's a little bit weird to have a black horizon line where if everything else is in the background is green. So I'm just going to take this out and take this out. And I'm going to redraw that in green. Now there's a fancier way of doing what I just did actually there's a way to turn that green specifically, but I'm trying to do this fast.
Yeah, I suppose it's a whole other conversation for how you time yourself with these things in terms of drawing to the level of detail that the client wants so that you're not exceeding so many hours. That's where
exactly.
I'm taking notes on how you're doing that because I tend to go probably a little bigger than I need to sometimes or a little more detailed overall.
Yeah, it's a measure of what's the minimum effort that I can do. I mean, to get the job done, and still have it look good. Okay, so I think that this guy is pretty much done. Now, a decision that I've got to make is if I include it with a white background or not. And I think for the purpose of this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in as tight as I can, and I'm going to use the lasso tool for that, just so I can select multiple layers. And I'm going to crop the image to this selection that I'm making right here, like that. And that's just a crop, what I just did. And so now that I've got this, I'm going to do a quick save as. Okay. All right, so now I've got my JPEG. So the next step is I'm going to open Adobe Illustrator. So now I'm going to switch programs. And for that, I do need to start a new share. So give me just a second. Okay, and so now I've got Illustrator. I'm going to go and find that same image. And here it is. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to lock this layer, okay? And then I'm going to create a new layer. Now, what I'm going to do in Illustrator is to create a series of paths that VideoScribe, which we'll use in a minute, will use to know what to draw first, to what to reveal. And so I like to start with the head. I need to make sure that my settings are correct on my pencil. So I'm going to double tap that. Need to pull this to where you can see it. Yep, I like it to be more accurate. Filling the new pencil strokes, we don't need to do that. Don't need to keep selected. Alt key toggles a smooth tool, and then close paths, don't need to do that either. So I can turn all of that off. I'm going to do just a line to see how big this tool is, and that's way too small, right? So I'm going to open this up to around 8 points. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a round cap and a round corner. And if I've done that properly, yep. So what I want is a stroke that's thick enough to be able to cover the picture.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm pretty much just going to trace exactly what I just drew in the order that I want this drawn. Okay. And what this is going to do, like I said, is that this is going to tell VideoScribe what to reveal in what order. And so I'm going to draw kind of one element at a time, like this. Now, there's another way of, well, there's like 5 ways of doing it. There's a way where VideoScribe will actually do the drawing rather than just the revealing the picture that's underneath. But I like this because, in my mind, when you're drawing in Illustrator, you don't have that same level of detail or quality that you get when you're drawing in Photoshop. So I like to draw in Photoshop. If I was drawing this whole thing natively in Illustrator, you could turn around and have VideoScribe render it without having to draw it in Photoshop first. But the level of precision, again, it's just not there when you're drawing in vector versus raster. Now I know that may sound a little weird because, well, gosh, wouldn't vector be the most accurate thing, right? Because you can blow it up to any size and what have you. But the thing is that with me, I think that vector will smooth things out too much and look artificial. I have a colleague that believes totally the opposite of what I just said. He does all of his drawing in Illustrator. And so what's nice about it is that, you know, we say, okay, which of these versions do you like? And we'll put both versions in front of the client. They'll say, well, I like this one or that one. And that's how we decide who does the work.
Wow. So you can actually show your customers in the future, 2 of you drawing, and they can decide which style?
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll actually show different examples at different levels of quality. There's lots of different ways of doing whiteboard animation. One of the ones that I think we talked about before is when I started doing this, you know, just taking a cell phone, you know, an iPhone, and using the camera to just film me drawing on a white piece of paper. And so that's really where it started, and then it got like a little bit more advanced to what I'm showing you now. This is sort of the full version of it. I could draw at a higher level of quality if I were to, say, go on the open internet and find a photograph, and rather than doing that blue pencil sketch that I showed you before, just tracing a photograph very carefully and meticulously, and, you know, using some of the methods that you were talking about, like, you know, cross-hatching and stippling to really do a high quality drawing in Photoshop, right? Still digital, but the trace is, you know, just about perfect.
Where's the fun in that?
I know, right? Well, you know, it depends. If the client wants that, that's job. That's work.
Oh yeah, I know. I've often copied a series of photographs in my drawings, just combining for the right thing that I want. And I enjoy that with using different backgrounds and different hands and different shapes and combining a whole big series of things. Sometimes those are really fun to come across when I come back to the research that I was looking at in terms of how the aesthetic and what I was looking to draw with it. All the series of photographs that go into one drawing.
Now I just, I don't know if you noticed, but that last line that I drew was too thin. It was too narrow. And so I just thickened the brush stroke. In fact, I'm gonna, just because I don't want to have to go in and draw every little leaf, I'm gonna make this very thick and see if I can get the whole tree at once. 30, because I don't want to spend thinking about the way that this thing is going to render or reveal itself rather. I don't want a whole lot of time spent drawing these individual tree elements, right? It's not as important as the soldier. Okay, and I've got it. So at this point, I have everything that I need. So my next step is I'm going to select all of these strokes that I've just drawn, and I'm actually going to make them transparent, if I remember how to do that. Yep, so transparency, I'm going to go over here and crank it all, the opacity all the way down to 0, okay? I'm going to do a save as. I'll pull this over here so you can see it. Now, this is one of the knackiest things about VideoScribe. So in order for it to work and reveal the way we want it to reveal, embed has got to be checked and presentation attributes has got to be on. And you can pretty much, you know, uncheck everything else that's on here. The default when you're saving out of Illustrator is like totally different from this. This remembers what I did last time. So it's already got it selected. The image location is embedded and the CSS's presentation attributes. If it's anything else, it won't render properly. And that took me the better part of a day to figure out. So hopefully you won't have to go through that. So I'm going to save it as an SVG. Okay. And at this point, I've got what I need in order to pull it into VideoScribe. But let me pause there for a second. Do you have any questions before I get that started?
Let me just look back through my notes. That was very all-encompassing. I was able to follow you, so thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. It looks like I had one that I was working on that I didn't save, so let me save and close and get out of here. So I'm going to do a new VideoScribe. And what I'll do here is I will import that image, that SVG that I just saved. It's going to think about it for a second, okay? And now I'm going to change a little bit of the image properties here. So we're going to make some decisions on this. So a drawing hand, I'm going to say no hand. And what that means is that there's no hand that's drawing this. So the alternative to that is you have something like this. And I used the hand for a long time, that visible hand, but at this point I think it's kind of distracting. It really doesn't need to be there in order to get it done. So I'm gonna save it as no hand. The image has already been selected. I'm gonna do some drawing options. And so what this means is it's gonna take 10 seconds to animate, and then it's gonna pause for 2 seconds, okay? Which looks pretty good. Everything else is all set. So let's see how this goes. So I'm gonna hit play. Now it's following those paths that I just drew in Illustrator.
Wow.
And that looks pretty good, okay?
Yeah.
There was one little error where it had zoom at the end. I can turn that off. Now, the next step is that I'm gonna get this ready to get pulled into Adobe Premiere so we can make a video out of it. And so that means I want this to be as high resolution as I can. So I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit. I'm going to tell it that this framing that I've got right now is where I want the camera to be. I'm going to do one more test just to see how it looks. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to do one more thing just to make it easy for my buddy, who I know is going to have to work with this. So one thing that's kind of traditional to do with these VideoScribes is to have them slide off somewhere like that, okay? Like at the end after you draw the thing, is to actually have it, you know, pan to some other thing. And in order to set that up, that's where I have to work the transition. So it's going to animate for 10 seconds, it's going to pause. It'll take 2 minutes for it to pan over to that box, or 1 second, I should say, that sets the speed. It'll take 1 second for it to pan over that box that I just dropped. I don't need that to spend any time animating. but I do need it to pause and sit there for just a second. So in other words, let's see how this looks. We're going to play from the beginning. And if I've done this right, it should pan over to the right 2 seconds after it's done rendering. That was a little fast, so I'm going to slow that down. So rather than a 1 second transition, I'm going to make that a 3 seconds transition, and we'll see how that goes. Pause for 2 seconds. Pans it along. That's pretty good.
And it actually came forward a little bit, which was cool.
It was kind of neat. You know, just added a little bit of interest to it. So the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click download video. And it's going to render for about the next 3 or 4 minutes. And what it will kick out is an MP4 that will then drop into Premiere along with all the other scenes that I'll draw. We can lay the audio against that. What we'll do is we'll stretch out the duration or compress the duration of each one of the scenes in order to fit the audio track that we're going to lay down. And that'll be it. That's how we create the whole video. Okay, so that's really it. What are your questions?
I think my first question is, how collaborative does this become? So let's say you sit down with the client, you get the requirements on terms of what they want to draw, and you get them to select the style. How many people can contribute to one of these? Is it typically where you'll see you want to stick with one style, or do you see that you're doing 3 of the vignettes and then your colleague is doing another 4, and then it kind of all comes together? Or is it typically one artist every time?
So that's a good question. It really depends on the level of quality in terms of what we're after. We're pretty good at aping each other's styles when we need to. And if we want to have a consistent style, we'll agree up front, okay, what style are we going to draw in? And that gets back to that initial graphic that I showed you, which, you know, just for the purpose of the video, I'll pull up again. But that gets back to this thing, where there's a lot of decisions that are made. And so this tells me and the people that I'm working with what style are we going to try to stick to. Obviously, the ones that are closer to the bottom are the easiest ones. And so it's easier to match each other's style if there's less detail that's there. In terms of how collaborative is this, I mean, typically one of us will own the entire video project from soup to nuts. And that starts with engaging with the client, where they say, hey, we want to do, maybe they'll start with a video, or they'll say something else like, we want a communication piece. And so we'll work through that with them. And if they get to the point of saying, okay, you know, we think that it's a video based on all these options you've showed us, you know, we can work the entire thing from start to finish. Any one of us can do that. But if it's if we decide to do a more collaborative thing, which is the case in this one, yeah, we'll just parse off the different pieces. So in this particular one, my colleague said, hey, I've got these images I need you to draw, and we agreed on style, and then I was off and running.
Okay. Is there a reason, even though you know there are potentially easier avenues to do it, is there a reason why you're sticking with the one where you go between multiple programs? Is it just a question of maybe you have so much repetition with this particular approach, so you're staying with it? Or is there a reason why you wouldn't draw it out by hand? So one of the first things I thought of, which is typical, is I would draw it out by hand, take a picture of it, scan it, take a picture of it, get it into the program, and then I could trace it with, I could put it into Adobe Illustrator and trace it from there. Is there a reason? It's just faster, I guess, because you can adjust, you don't have to erase. Is that kind of the reason why you do it that way?
I would say it's faster for me. The workflow that you just outlined, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
And, you know, this particular workflow that I showed you, it evolved up from, you know, just the iPhone videos. Then we played around with a GoPro and actually, you know, filming somebody drawing on paper. And we actually cranked out lots of videos that way with just putting it on a GoPro and then expanding and contracting the different scenes in Premiere after the fact. But yeah, what you just said about doing it in Illustrator, there's nothing wrong with that. I just find honestly, for me, I have the advantage of having a really nice 22-inch Wacom tablet. And so it's just as easy for me to draw natively on that as it is to draw on paper.
Okay, that's good to know too. I mean, I find my comfort level on paper is quite high, but obviously there's times where I have to start over. So getting into the drawing on the iPad felt a little more natural to me than the Wacom tablet that my customer provided me. For whatever reason, the point was off and they never got it quite right. So wherever I hovered the pen when I tried to do that initial, the word is escaping me when you have to sync up the end of the pencil with the screen. What's that called?
Calibration.
Calibration. Thank you. So the calibration never went well. My customer's like, "How come you're not using this tablet?" And I said, "Well, still working on getting a place to put the images in your environment." But the answer was I can't get the calibration right after like 4 or 5 tries. So I've never really quite gone into it. And that's a bad reason not to use one, but I've stuck with the iPad, and that's had some initial success so far. And it's given me a sketching quality. And what I liked about what you just showed me was now I know how to sketch it and then make that a layer, draw over top of it, and make that my video layer potentially, where I can get that playback and speed it up and slow it down. So that was huge what you just showed me. I'd never really considered that. I thought I'd have to draw it all in real time and worry about how to erase it. So that was awesome.
Yeah. So, well, and to your point, I mean, that's one of the reasons that I like this particular workflow is because I'm not a great illustrator. And so I can make changes and errors in Photoshop with either the blue pencil or then going over and inking it in with black or coloring. I can make changes at any point along the way. Whereas if you're doing it live, either on paper or something else, you're one and done. You can't really make a mistake. So the rendering just concluded. So let me show you what the final video looks like. So this is playing in VLC, video player. And this is it's either an AVI. Yeah, this is an AVI, not an MP4. But I could have just as easily set it up to play it as an MP4 or save it as an MP4.
If you notice,
now
I just noticed if you go back to like second or like number 6, look at the legs. The way that it's traced, you see the camo first. Is that a problem for you, or would you not view that as a how
you see the little edges of the camo peeking in? Yeah. So you know why that's happening, right? It's because of the reveal of the stroke of the black line. Right. It's a little bit of that camo is peeking in. I mean, so again, no. It's not really an issue for me at this level of detail. Like that's why that initial agreement on style is so important. And that's the kind of thing where at speed, if I'm showing it to an audience, they're never going to see that. That's way too small of a level of detail.
Okay, good. That's exactly what I need to hear, because I notice it, but I think as an artist, that perfectionist slips in. So hearing what you've experienced with your audience is so much more important than me being a perfectionist when it comes to getting into this business. So I appreciate you offering that particular perspective.
No, definitely. And this is something that I've had to kind of work on myself. Actually, I've had to pull it the other way because, like I said, starting with doing micro videos with an iPhone on top of a beer glass, that's as low quality as it gets. And so, my team is constantly pushing me. It's like, Brian, you got to refine this a little bit more, make it a little bit more, can we do a little bit higher quality? But at the end of the day, it's thinking about the usage that it's going to get, and what's important is the message behind it that it carries. I mean, this is already light years ahead of any PowerPoint that the customer would otherwise see, and that's really what we're competing against, is the PowerPoint presentations.
All right. How often do you do this commercially? Is this really just what you're doing for your primary customer at the moment?
Actually, this is not, it's not a huge piece of our work. Let me show you something else, actually. I'm going to take you to my website because I actually just wrote a blog post that walks through the workflow of this, the whole thing from start to finish.
Awesome.
Um,
That worked out well.
yeah, yeah. So here's my website, Lizard Brain Solutions. And so I did a whiteboard animation for the Naismith School, which is out here in Herndon, Virginia. Okay. And so the whole process for it is that we begin with a script. The script is the thing that really matters the most. And we spend most of our time with that. So in the script, we've got what's the scene number, what might the image look like, what's the script itself, and then on the far right, what we do is we have a space for the client to provide any kind of edits or feedback. Okay, we typically do this in Google Docs, with our commercial clients anyway. And then just like I showed you, we would start doing pencil sketches for each one of these scenes. Now this one was more of they wanted the higher end, right? Going back to that chart that we initially started with. And so each one of these drawings, it's a blue pencil drawing, but it's a blue pencil on top of a photograph that was underneath it. Okay. And it just tracks right along with the suggested images that we had written in the script. We want to try to catch as many edits as possible here in the storyboard, because this is where it's easy to make edits, right? Much more difficult to make edits after you've already created the video, right?
Yeah.
And so once we've got an approval on the pencil sketches, then we'll go ahead and ink them out and then animate the drawing, like in this little GIF that I've got here, in exactly the same way that I just did it for you. And as you can tell, we didn't use the hand on top of it. Now, a piece of feedback that we got from them in this particular video, and I'm going to mute it here just so you don't have to hear it, but a piece of feedback that we got from these guys is that they did want to have the hand. And so that's where that's how it shows up. I'll skip ahead a little bit just so you can see how that same picture of the girl's head would otherwise appear. And if you watch the whole thing, there's like an audio track, there's music, the voiceover is there. And we've added a couple of kind of fun and interesting effects to it. This next one I'm kind of proud of. Hold on.
Oh,
we
that's
draw
awesome.
the school. Well, and then because I had the photograph anyway, we just did a fade too, and then the school appears. Okay.
Now, is the hand
so pretty much
is the hand the software, or is it your actual hand tracing?
The hand is the part of the software. And I have another colleague who's, she's one of those really high professionals when she comes to this, and she's always giving me a hard time about how come you haven't photographed your own hand. But I just haven't got around to it. Yeah, it's just superimposed on top of the drawing by the software.
Cool. Yeah, you'd have to get a lot of hand tattoos or something to make sure people knew it was yours.
Yeah.
So that, for the sake of the work and the art, right? Just kidding.
Yeah. Well, I might do that. That's a thing. One thing I'm going to turn my camera on just for a second, even though I don't want to. But one thing, let's see if I can find it. Here we are. It's probably worth pointing out. Yeah, here we are. Hi there.
Hello.
So this is a tablet glove. Speaking of like things that are unique to your hand.
Okay.
So I really like having a tablet glove, especially if you're using like a Microsoft Surface or an iPad or something like that. A Cintiq is pretty good about not detecting your hand and registering it as somebody touching and interacting with the screen. But iPads and Microsoft Surfaces, they're built to detect a touch. So this will make it so you can rest your hand, draw naturally and comfortably without whatever surface you're drawing on actually registering as that's a touch.
That's awesome. One of the reasons I went with the iPad Pro over the Surface was iPad Pro and some of their apps was a little bit better about that, but there's times where I still feel the drag and it's very frustrating. I have to go back and mess with it. So I did not know a tablet glove existed. So thank you. I have a list of equipment here that keeps coming up in what you're saying. So thank you for that.
Sure. No worries. That if you do choose to go down the path of the Cintiq, I would work up to that. It's kind of an investment. That's a big one.
Yeah.
So
that's probably going to
go ahead. What other questions do you have?
So when you take in, so I'm seeing these steps and everything, what's exciting is I know I'm going to be learning a new genre. I know I'm learning a new skill. How often does your client want to be involved, or do they just kind of say, hey, here, I mean, is it as simple as you're describing? I guess I don't know if I know the answer to this question already, but it seems like once they give you the script and they pick the pictures, it's a fairly straightforward process. I mean, are we talking this is like, 2 days of work? Is this a week? I mean, what's normally the contract for? Is it you're going to do a video in X amount of hours or time?
Yeah, so it depends. I'm really lucky that most of the clients that I've worked with are very accommodating when it comes to time. I mean, I guess we've been on the phone for what, about 45 minutes or so. I don't know. I sort of lost track, but it takes about that long to do this level of drawing per picture. So I sort of work that into my back of the napkin estimates for how long it takes. What I usually consider is about 1 hour per scene, start to finish, right? To draw the thing, render it out, and then later to go back and edit it and pull the whole thing together. Now, when it comes to the clients, so this is something that I'm just starting to put some thought into, and really another colleague of mine has put a lot more thought into it, about the degree to which clients want to be involved with the production process. So, we've got some clients who are just like, in fact, this one for the school, they were, at the beginning, they were very high touch, and then they liked everything that I put in front of them. They had very little feedback in terms of the drawings or anything else. We've had other clients who have wanted to have been involved with every step of the process. I had one client who, literally, she would zoom into my computer exactly the same way that you're doing it right now. And, I would do the blue pencil sketches with her, watching every stroke that I made, making adjustments to it.
Okay.
So that was very high touch, right? And so with her, I worked out a time and materials basis, because it was, there was no way that I was going to be able to estimate how long it took. Now, both of those I think are extreme cases.
Sure.
But one of the things I'm trying to just attune myself to is the degree to which a client wants to have a high or a low touch or high or low input into the actual design process. The one thing I will say is that this particular workflow, it's fairly future-proof. And what I mean by that is, unlike filming an entire whiteboard in one shot, this can be edited very easily, because I can just go back and change one scene at a time rather than an entire scene. One of the things that's knacky about VideoScribe is that although you can pull audio into the VideoScribe software or application, what you have to do is you have to stretch and compress each drawing in order to match the audio underneath it by typing in what you think the duration of the animation should be, by the second or by the decimal second. And that's very difficult to do, versus in Premiere, where you can literally just drag out the segment with a mouse click to make it fill whatever space you're trying to fill. So anyway, the point is that over time, we've gotten a lot better by making these things easier to edit, so that if clients do have changes, they're easier to make. One other just brief thought on this. So I think what separates what we do from graphic designers is that graphic designers will typically, they're focused on the product. On the other hand, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create these whiteboard animations as a way of entering into dialogue with anybody who might see it. And so if you can make them easy to edit, if you can make them future-proof, what you can do is you can show this to somebody and then say, well, but what do you think? What feedback do you have? What edits might you make? And you can go and you can gather that feedback in a facilitated session, in a graphically facilitated session where you're gathering feedback on the storyboard. And then you go back and you change the video. And now they see their own words reflected back at them in the next version of the thing. And so in that way, the video can actually be kind of a prototype or an MVP of whatever the message is that's underneath it, which is kind of a cool thing. It's a way of visualizing whatever the message is. And not only that, when people see their own words reflected back at them, they're engaged in the process more so than if they were just offering feedback after the fact.
Well, the other thing I thought of, and this isn't meant to sound, it's going to come out in a clumsy way, but just bear with me. My thought was, as you're doing that, you could use so much of the videos you've done that way. If somebody said, hey, I need a soldier, and then I need the scene to unfold this way, you've already got so much of that stuff done by doing it in these individual scenes. It's almost, and not to say this would be ideal necessarily any time, but if you've got 600 scenes and somebody says what they want, and then you bring them in and say, well, good news, I've already got these things here. Do you like the colors? Do you like the pace? Is this the style you want? If so, you're kind of offering those things again, but then with their words, like you said. Has that happened in the past where you've been able to do that? Or is this more specialized where you're using everything's really authentic and like brand new?
It's happening more and more. And to your point, it really depends on the style and the uniqueness of the images. Now, stuff like this, something that's generic enough, like a soldier walking, I mean, that's something that we can use again and again. But on that initial photo, let me go back to it one more time. Yeah. So each one of these was drawn for a video, or actually another thing that's called a vision map, which is like a single static image. But each one of these is a unique element that was drawn either for an action sketch or a vision map. And so we had all of these saved in a folder somewhere. And I just went through and picked out the ones that I thought in order to get the idea across. I didn't draw any of these native for this particular image. They were all reused from something else. And so, if we can be consistent with style, like drawing these little, Bicablo people, which is the name of these little guys, if we can be consistent with style, then yeah, it's easy. But, one thing I wouldn't want to do, regardless of how much I want to get, is I wouldn't want to mix styles. I wouldn't want to have a bean person next to a silhouette, next to a Bicablo person, next to somebody who was traced from a photograph,
Yeah, so you're helping me because I was looking at this illustration style as JPEG. It looks like first off, it looks like a huge, huge file because you had to pull in all those images. So already, I think I'll probably need to get some mentoring in that, and even maybe spend another session with you on just how you manage the hardware, software that you use for these things. But looking into that, there's a part of me, it's like, okay, I think I could probably sketch the left, the middle, and the right if I wanted to, and then augment after I've put them all into one section. But it looks like you've pulled them all into one big one, and then obviously bin them with the different details. But it's like, holy cow, that looks like, I mean, I'm so excited by this already because I've already got a lot of isolated drawings and doodles that I've done that I could show people for different styles. But just managing that file size, because I haven't done it before, I would need a little help with.
Yeah, so that's not a problem. I'd be happy to set something up with you. This is, let me just go back and count real quick. But the process for coming up with this, and I'll just do a light touch on this. So yeah, I just opened up. So we have this thing that's called an elements folder, where anytime we can break down an image into a very basic drawing, like, a picture of a globe or an icon, if you like, we just happen to call it elements. You could call it whatever you want to. So anytime we do that, we try to do a save as in whatever format is convenient at the time, in whatever piece of software we happen to be using it in, and we save it. And right now, I just did a quick count, but we have just a little bit shy of 1,800 elements that are in there that I can get in different styles that show different things, that I can go into that and say, well, okay, if I need to draw a picture of the White House, I just drag and drop, right? Because I've already drawn it once. And so, yeah, to your point, if you're thinking about reusing these images, the more generic you can make them, the more you can reuse them, but the less specialized they are to the client, which I think is something that's really important. If it gets so generic that it's clip art, it loses its meaning.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just looking for a better way to convey my portfolio and the skill sets and kind of get people zeroed in on something. Like I did like kind of a requirement session yesterday, and it was just the art of the possible from the very beginning. I couldn't zero them in this way, and you're giving me great ideas on how to do that. And the element suggestion is incredible because I think I have a lot of isolated things already. I just haven't brought them together in one way. I keep showing you the big finished products, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. You need that too, but the isolated ones are great.
Cool. Well, Wade, thanks for your time. Anything else? Anything that I haven't covered?
No, I think you've already given me some things on the horizon to look forward to. You've already talked to me about equipment. You've talked to me about investments. You've talked to me about software. You've talked to me about your approach. There's going to be a video after all this to go along with my notes. So I think I'm feeling pretty good. And you've already given me some ideas on how I can start playing around with this in my iPad, mainly because it's going to be a while before I can get the software suite that you have. So I'm going to see how I can kind of replicate that there if it's possible, and if it's close, then it's a good start.
Mm-hmm. If you were to push it as far as what I've done, that might be taking a little bit too far. I mean, really, check out brushes, check out work visual on the iPad, and more probably better than that is to get onto the graphic facilitation Facebook group, because I know that there's a much bigger contingency of digital scribes than me. And they have this kind of conversation all the time about what are the best tools to use. And so that you'd probably get a lot better advice.
Okay.
Yeah. I would just get on that as soon as you can.
Okay. And then you said brushes for the app.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one. I don't know if that's still out there anymore, but that may be one to take a look at. Most of the folks that I know use work visual.
Okay. Work visual is not one I came across. So yeah, I'm working on being in a place where I can use all these things all the time. I haven't popped out my iPad in like 2 months to do any drawing because I haven't been able to use it for work. So this is perfect. Thank you for giving me some things to go research and explore. And I absolutely,
you're very welcome, Wade.
I don't want to take up any more of your time, Brian. I don't know how I got so lucky to meet you and you being so generous with your time to do this. I mean, I mean that sincerely, because there's a lot of people out there that get really good at what they do and they forget to pay it forward. And that's kind of been your story from the beginning. So thank you for taking your time to do this with me today.
Thank you for listening. I really appreciate that. And with your permission, I'm going to share this video with a few other folks because they've been asking to. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'd be happy to. No problem at all.
Cool.
And
I'm
looking forward to seeing the finished product. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Wade. I'll catch you later. Take care.
Take care. Bye.